and welcome to another episode of the Thrivalist Manifesto with Ben V and DrG. Ben, today we're going to do another episode where we're going to touch on some theme, on a theme related to women. We want to really touch on some of the women in our world who are thriving in big ways in their careers, in their personal life, academically and entrepreneurially. And the series of women that we're bringing to the table are not just thriving, but they will actually probably kick your ass.
Probably, yeah. We're in the spirit of switching gears here at the Thrivalist Manifesto. We're going to focus on women that are thriving in their particular passion, that are making a huge difference, that are mavericks in their particular passion, and I think it's the best way to go.
Absolutely. And today we have the weightlifter slash rocket scientist, Gwen Sisto. Gwen is the author of several books. One of them is Kazakhstan Weightlifting System and Soviet Weightlifting System. She's the first female author to publish a scientific book on weightlifting. Her books have been used by professional sports teams. Gwen has competed for Team USA multiple times on the international level and won multiple national competitions. She has a world record in the snatch for her age group. She holds a master's in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT, of all places.
Yeah, real shithole
School up there in the Northeast.
Yeah.
And a bachelor's degree of science in aerospace engineering from Georgia Tech. So welcome, Gwen Sisto.
Gwen, because she broke the world record last year. Is that correct, Gwen? You broke it last year. And I believe it was 63 kilo weight class. And what was the world record?
77 kilos, yeah.
Oh, perfect. 77 kilos. So translate into pounds for our mathematically challenged.
God, of course you gotta give me a math problem. Just kidding. Like, almost 170.
172, I think.
Yeah.
So
okay,
it's a lot of weight for a snatch, and people, you can look up the technique on the snatch. You can actually look it up, I guess, on YouTube and see the world record being broken. But, Gwen is a very unique individual in that the passion that she brings from weightlifting to her work, as well as brings from her work to weightlifting. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and hopefully,
So, Gwen, for our listeners, you weren't always an athlete, is that correct?
Yeah, that's definitely correct.
So, kind of bring us back to when you were not an athlete. What was life like for you when you were not an athlete?
Well, it was like back when I was, I don't know, like 5th grade or something. Like my whole, especially during elementary school, it's like those key formative years where you have like an evil gym teacher that makes you feel like you can't do anything and you suck and you're not athletic and maybe you're not as slim as the other kids. I mean, definitely wasn't like obese or anything, but I was like, a tiny bit chubby, whatever. And then you have these other kids that are just like, like worshipped as like the star or something. And I don't know, but the other thing is like, I never realized that I actually would have to have like do physical activity. I think as a young kid, I just, kind of rode my bike or rollerbladed a little bit here and there. So sometime around 5th or 6th grade, I was introduced to Olympic weightlifting, and it was pretty amazing because all of a sudden, like, I could do things I could never do. Like, I could run a mile in, like, 7 minutes, where before I couldn't even finish the mile. Like, I would never finish the mile. I'd have to, like, walk half of it. Like, this is just from weightlifting, not even an aerobic activity, right? It was crazy.
Right.
And then just all of a sudden I was, like, really lean, and I had muscle before, but I was, like a little bit more defined. So it was just, like, this amazing transformation pretty instantly just from a few months of weightlifting. And then I started competing, and I was winning these local meets. I went to nationals, and I medaled at the junior nationals. I made like a bunch of junior teams for USA. It was pretty cool.
Were there a lot of females competing in weightlifting back in the late 80s? Would that be?
No, it was actually in the late 90s.
Wow! Hold on a second while I pull my foot out of my mouth.
Thanks, Ben. No, it was not really. I mean, there were certainly more in the late 90s and the late 80s, but like weightlifting wasn't even an Olympic sport yet. So it was also, you know what I mean? It was weird. Like, it was kind of like official, but not really official. Like, there are definitely a lot of women, but not like there are now.
Right.
Like, now I think there's maybe, like, 4,000 USAW female lifters, because there's about 10,000 lifters. I'd say less than half are women, so maybe 3,000 to 4,000. Back then, it was probably more like, I don't know, 900, 800. I don't know, because there's probably only 2,000 people registered at USA Weightlifting.
I mean, I remember the days of the Russians, right, during the Cold War. I don't ever remember them showing a female competing in weightlifting back then on the Olympics, or back then it was the wild world of sports. That's why I was asking, like, when did that transition, or when did that become more popular?
So that was really, because that was, so women's weightlifting had the first world championships in the late 80s, actually in Daytona Beach, Florida. And eventually it got very popular to the point where it was in the Olympics in the year 2000. Probably it could have been in the Olympics even earlier. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think in like it looked like the Soviets had started training women, you know, probably in the 80s or so, you know, in anticipation of the sport. But you're right, like back in the day, back before like 1987, it was even more a man's sport. Even when I first started lifting, it was still like a man's sport. I would actually have people ask me like, "Why are you weightlifting? Isn't that for guys? Mm-hmm. Are you going to hurt yourself?" Mm-hmm. You know what? Every once in a while, I don't. You know what? Honestly, I haven't gotten that question in about like, I don't know, 8 years, which I think shows progress. Like I get asked that less and less, but I really forget how often I used to get asked that question.
That's interesting.
And it's amazing going back to that time in your life when your self-esteem was probably suffering before you discovered weightlifting, where you were kind of self-conscious about your appearance, self-conscious about, you know, just about yourself, and all of a sudden you're getting all kinds of success in weightlifting, which really drove your self-esteem, your confidence. And explain a little bit about how that influenced you and maybe even contributed to success in other parts of your life.
Oh, that's so true. So, like, you know, I was probably this kid that was a little self-conscious, you know, kind of good at some things, but afraid to speak up. Afraid to make friends. But then through weightlifting, it's like this whole other world I was exposed to. I made friends with different weightlifters from all over. And then when you start lifting things over your head that weigh a lot more than you kind of start losing a lot of fear, because everything seems so much simpler in comparison. Everything seems less hard. Like, I've never had a fear of public speaking. That could just be my personality partially, but certainly, you know, you get up on a stage in weightlifting in a singlet, you're not going to be afraid to get up on a stage and talk to people.
Right.
So it's really helped me a lot with my social skills. It's also helped a lot with my academics, because you have to train really hard. And if you have to study really hard, especially when I was doing my master's and undergrad, you really have to push yourself hard if you want to be the best at it. And
well, not just that. Aeronautics and astronomics at that level that you both studied and are working, that's still a man's field.
It is. Oh, that's true. So I've always worked in the aerospace industry, which is like a man's field. Mm-hmm. I'm always around like men at school when I was at school, and I'm always around men when I weightlift. I don't know. And the thing is, like, I probably could talk in a higher register if I wanted to, but I think part of it is I spend so much time with men that like it kind of rubs off on me. It's kind of weird. So yeah, I guess I like men. That's the whole.
No, to Dr. G's point, the weightlifting must have been a positive when you decided, hey, I want to study aeronautics. I want to study aeronautics at this level. I mean, you started at Georgia, and it was like that was your undergraduate, and then you went on to get your master's. So at a certain point, the weightlifting must have been like, yeah, I know I'm probably there's only 4% women in the program, but I definitely want to do this.
Yeah, it did. So that's a good point, because it didn't really, the fact that it wasn't like 50-50 women, it didn't really scare me at all. I mean, I remember there were many classes where I was the only female. I remember there was this building at Georgia Tech, the Daniel Guggenheim building, and it was like if you had to go to the bathroom, there's only a women's bathroom on the second floor. Because there were so few women, because it was an old building and only had one bathroom on each floor. So finally, they had to make one of them a women's bathroom. So it's like, and it was like one of those buildings with a mezzanine, so you had to really go up like 3 flights of stairs. It's just a lot of little things like that I didn't really pick up on. It just became normal to me, I guess.
Yeah. No, I went to Embry-Riddle.
Yeah.
And when I was at Embry-Riddle, I remember we were registering. I remember that there were so many volunteers there to help the females that were registering, because I didn't realize it till I was in school already for a few months. There was only about 10% that were female at that time. Right. So, of course, they were getting all the attention, but I couldn't imagine, like, deciding, oh, yeah, this is a field that I want to get into at that, with that kind of imbalance.
So now, Gwen, just to veer off of the weightlifting for a second, what type of work have you done in aeronautics? Literally working on rocket engines, or?
Yeah, well, I've worked on jet engines and satellites. So, I've done like research projects on missiles, research projects on UAVs, but a lot of work on satellites and jet engines.
So for jet engines, what, like performance-based stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff, like design of it, performance of the jet engine, conceptual design, aeromechanics, like really everything from really deep analysis to everything to like supporting foreign air forces and making sure their engines got repaired on time, that type of thing, managing profit and loss. So yeah, I've done like a lot. It's because there are some people who tend to just kind of stick with one thing, and I probably tend to be more broad, doing multiple types of things because I find everything really interesting. Mm-hmm. I kind of want to do everything. That's my biggest flaw.
So I'm trying to imagine what the gym facilities were like at MIT and who was in there. Was anybody lifting heavy weights over there?
So that's a good point. So like by the time I was at MIT, I already had like a child. So, and I was working full time at the same time. So actually, my gym was in my garage at my house, and then later I was training at another training center not far from my house. But I actually never used the MIT. I used the MIT gym once, but they didn't really have a good varsity weight room at the time. Like, the varsity weight room at Georgia Tech was, like, amazing. But the MIT one was kind of like, 2 platforms, a few machines.
What are the big sports at MIT? I can't imagine. They don't have, like, a football team, do they?
Division III football.
Really? Wow.
Man.
I think it's something like that, right? Because
I don't know, because I never even gave that any thought, to be honest.
Well, just you don't put together people who are going to be excelling in physics and mathematics, that they would put a whole lot of time into physical fitness, but you certainly have done that. And I would assume your knowledge of physics and mathematics plays a role in your analysis of your students when they're lifting, and even yourself when you're lifting.
Absolutely. It's so strange because the two things really go together and they reinforce each other. So my lifting taught me that I could study hard, and then my studying hard taught me I could train harder. Which kind of like it's like this infinite loop, and it's just there's a really mental side of lifting where you have to do the hard brain work and the hard analysis, and you can't just be like, I'll pull the bar higher. You have to really think about like what are you doing. What are you doing at each moment? And then it gets even tougher because you can't think about it while you're lifting. Because while you're lifting, it's a reflex reaction. It uses your sympathetic nervous system. So to do that heavy analysis with your central nervous system, you got to kind of like sit down, take a break, think about it, and then go apply it. So, but yeah, with physics, the whole thing of conceptualizing, the bar should be closer to me here. I need to have my shoulders a little bit over the bar. I should be leaning forward a little bit more at this point. At this point, I should be more extended. That absolutely, definitely helps. Even everything from belts to shoes to straps to bars. Just having that engineering background, I feel like I'm more equipped to select the best items, because you want to take every advantage you can get.
Yeah, most of our listeners don't understand that the sport of weightlifting is highly technical, highly neurological, and on top of that, the training for that sport is basically all math. It's about how many reps are you doing, at what percentage, and when are you doing it, and how are you carefully managing that as to not overtrain but yet be able to stimulate your nervous system enough to progress. So it's not as simple as lifting heavier weights, which most people would look at it as.
That's absolutely an excellent point. I didn't even think to bring that up. So yeah, when you do your programming, you're absolutely right. We use basically, I like to use Soviet methodology because it's been proven to work. And I know people are like, oh, they use drugs, whatever. But guess what? There's a lot of people who come out of sports like CrossFit that get popped with drugs and still don't perform well. So what does that tell you? It's they don't have good programming. By the way, drugs are bad. I'm making that clear. But where I'm going with this is everything is calculated. You can calculate your program. You basically program in waves and undulations. You have to, like exactly as you said, Ben, you have to calculate the load, like how many repetitions you do, the intensity zones, and then there's other references that and like mathematical constants you could use to and apply to that. So like I go into a lot about that in my book and actually how to do it on the Soviet system. But yeah, it is math, and unfortunately, the Soviets did a lot of work in creating like trends and data. So they took a lot of the heavy mental lifting out of it. So it's actually pretty. I think it's fairly easy to program, and there's always ways to evolve and create new stuff. But yeah, you're right. It is math, and it's not voodoo. A lot of people in sports try to make things down to be like voodoo and good luck and stuff like that. It's simple math.
Gwen, is it safe to say that the Soviet system, being that I guess there was an Iron Curtain and therefore information was blocked from that they actually far surpassed the United States when it comes to knowledge about this type of sport?
Yeah, it's really fascinating because you're exactly right. They would train. Okay, so the way this worked is there was Vorobiev who was studying how to train astronauts or cosmonauts so they can survive the rigors of space. So, in order to do that, he applied training methodologies to weightlifters, which also happened to help produce successful weightlifters. So that information was used to prepare the cosmonauts so they could survive the rigors of space. And then they were really successful in weightlifting, so they continued doing all these studies. And you had like this network of scientists that were always doing studies and referencing each other's studies, and kept improving the knowledge base. At the same time, you didn't have any really American scientists necessarily cross-pollinating with that kind of circle of practice. And even today, I would argue that we're not even leveraging all that information. I mean, certainly there are pockets of people that are using it, but it should be more commonplace than it is. Because I feel like sometimes people have to reinvent the wheel. It's already been done. So
what you're saying is that the sports science and the aeronautical or the astronautical, the NASA-type scientists were working together in the Soviet Union, but that cross-pollination didn't really take place here in the States.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. It's interesting because it's just a completely two different approaches that America and the former Soviet Union.
So I'll take a tackle at that. Basically, during that time period of the Cold War, there was only two ways that could assure that the Soviet Union was showing political power over the rest of the world. One was in their military, i.e. their space program, and two was in sport. So they poured a ton of money into research on how to get ahead both in the space program as well as in sport, in international sport. So they did so much research that we would never put money behind in North America. And out of that research came a lot of good results.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of smart people working in sports science here, but can you imagine if we had that level of coordination in our own country and that level of funding? It'd be completely different.
Mm-hmm. And you watch movie. I mean, again, Hollywood is Hollywood, but the film Apollo 13 was on just the other night, and I was watching it with my son, and you watch that, and you're like, man, scientists back then could do anything. Like they just were so smart, and if they would have applied sports science to space science, you know, they might have been able to come through with some of those breakthroughs they had in the Soviet countries. So Gwen, do you find that you almost want to redesign some of the workout equipment? Like, do you find that some things are, you know, could be better?
Oh, that's a good point. I mean, for me, I'm such a utilitarian and a minimalist that I just need a squat rack, a platform, a bar, and bumper plates. I mean, certainly there's this whole new market of low-cost bars, and I would redesign them completely. Actually, one company, I won't mention their name, they gave me a prototype bar, and they had like a combination of bushings and bearings. I'm like, why would you even put a bushing in there if you already have bearings? You're like, well, we're afraid, you know, people in CrossFit are going to drop it and destroy it. I'm like, well, look, your bushing's already coming out. Just remove the bushing, just keep the bearings. It's kind of funny because there is a whole market now. All sorts of new spins on the weightlifting stuff is coming up. I mean, you wouldn't think there's a lot of ways to innovate a bar and bumper plates, but there's still a lot of small things you can do. Like even like for example, the Clocon bars, their bumper plates have a little channel where you can actually grip the plates and pick them up.
That's huge.
I know, it's genius. Just a stupid little finger channel.
Who didn't think of that?
Like whatever regulations.
We did walk around with those stupid horseshoes lifting the plates up.
So Gwen, in the work that you're doing now, because you're doing quite a bit of coaching, you're seeing people come into the sport in males, females, but are you also seeing wide gaps in age differences? Are you seeing people? Oh
yeah, I think people are less and less afraid to try weightlifting, especially as they're older. Actually, one thing that Mark Cameron, who was the first American to clean and jerk 500 pounds, told me was that weightlifting is a mature person's sport. So it's okay if you don't really start it as a kid or as a little kid, whatever, because it takes so much discipline and workload to do it, and then you need time to build all that muscle mass. But you could be someone in your 60s who starts. I mean, I once had a guy who was a doctor, a podiatrist. Mm-hmm. He must have been like 65, and he had huge improvements. I mean, he did some lifting before at CrossFit, but you could still get people to improve. And it's just, it's different expectations. What are you training for? How far do you want to go? I think everyone can benefit from weightlifting. I mean, for me, I feel like sometimes I've gained a superpower because my reflexes are so good just from using my sympathetic nervous system. And that's one thing that, you get this prowess that you would normally get doing other sports. So it can benefit anyone at any age. And then just it's a sport that trains your entire body. So there really are anti-aging effects or effects that keep you youthful. The fact that you have to have a lot of brain engagement. You have to really engage all your ligaments. It's actually fantastic for keeping people youthful.
It's funny you say that. A lot of the work that I'm doing, as far as my writing goes, has to do with what are the hallmarks of aging. And if we were to say what they are, the three main hallmarks of aging are what we call neurodegeneration. So your nervous system becomes less engaged, right? And an extreme example of that would be Alzheimer's, of course, but even just some mild cognitive decline can, also fit in there. And as we get older, our nervous system doesn't respond reflexively as well as it once did. The other two components are smaller muscle and weaker muscle. So sarcopenia and dynopenia. And what you're talking about are doing the type of lifting where you really do engage your brain and central nervous system. So you're going to stave off the effects of neurodegeneration. And, of course, you're making sure that your muscles are not atrophying and that your muscles remain strong.
For our audience, we're going down a rabbit hole in terms of neuromuscular terms and neurology and what Dr. G means about the exercise is basically what he's saying is the Olympic lifts are more neurologically challenging and what he and I like to refer to as smart exercises. So on the one end of the spectrum, you have an elliptical where you can read a paper and take a phone call and answer an email at the same time you're doing the elliptical. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have an exercise like the barbell snatch where you can't really even think about the movement while you're doing it. You have to override that part of your nervous system. So those type of exercises stimulate your brain and the brain connectivity in such a way that they stave off the decline of those neurons, those nerve cells in your brain. In fact, they excite the connectivity between them and hence become anti-aging.
Yep.
Yeah, it's quite amazing because, there are some people that say, why would you bother teaching like a 40-year-old woman how to snatch if she's never done it before in her entire life? Why wouldn't you just have her do like hip thrusters and split squats? Oh, by the way, that's a whole other subject, the sexism in training, like giving women little tiny dumbbells and do things like hip thrusters and split squats, right? They're not allowed, or lunges, they're not allowed to do anything else. But what I would argue is, if their whole goal is to like look good and stay young and fit, weightlifting does all that for you. You get amazing reflexes. It engages your brain. It turns your brain back on. Again, like you were just saying, your sarcopenia, dynopenia, you're going to increase your bone density and your muscle mass and your strength. Who can't use more strength?
Interestingly enough, your alma mater is the one that kind of paves the way. They have an aging lab, and they're the ones that are doing all the research on aging. And I was telling Dr. G, and we mentioned it in another podcast recently, that the number one determining factor for aging is loss of strength. And
really?
Overall, yeah. It's the ability to get yourself off the ground without any help, and predominantly strength. And that comes right out of a long study done at MIT.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Like, one of the things, it's kind of funny, a personal anecdote, is people, every now and then they're like, why do you waste so much time weightlifting? Why don't you just come out? Are you lifting again? Do you have to lift so many days a week? Whatever. But the longer I lift, the more benefits I see. Because it's not really that obvious when you're like 25, but I think once you start getting closer to 30 and you start looking at your peers, you're like, oh wow, I look like I've been frozen in time, and you know what I mean. Like the aging process is definitely impeded by lifting. I don't think there's any argument from that. So I think it's always important not to stop. I think like actor Terry Crews talks about it. Like, why would you ever stop working out?
Exactly.
Like,
I have a personal philosophy on that, and I think a sport like an activity like weightlifting for a recreational person, it basically fights gravity. So, and I think gravity is a huge part of the aging process. So, the fact that you're anti-gravity was what you're doing, I think that's a big part of it. And for me personally, I switched to more weightlifting in the last couple of years because I felt like I wanted to stay more athletic, and I have a baby, so I'm like, that's a way that I can train and stay strong, but I want to keep that mobility and that athleticism to be able to move around with him.
Oh yeah, and you guys look great, by the way.
Thank you.
Listen, they look way younger than their actual age, so is that?
All right.
We look great for octogenarians.
I can't even spell that.
Well, anyway.
So we definitely touched on the importance of, and again, when it comes to age, I have my mother who's turning 80. I want to watch. I want her to squat because for the rest of your life, you want to be able to get off a toilet seat. You want to be able to get in and out of a car. Squatting is required for all of those activities, so why wouldn't you make that part of your exercise routine? And even getting off the floor, I mean, that's something that we have a lot of family in California. They're of Persian descent, and they just love sitting on the floor. And their 75, 80-year-old grandmothers and grandfathers sit on the floor, and you watch them get up, and it's beautiful. They have full knee flexion, full hip flexion, the ability to squat out of come out of a deep squat, and it's because they've been doing it every day as part of the social fabric of their life, of their family life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now let me shift gears a little bit and talk about kids. There are people who are taking on weightlifting as a sport, and there are people who are using weightlifting to enhance their other sports. What trends are you seeing now with teenage sports and weightlifting?
It kind of depends. Again, I think societally we're getting less and less afraid of using weightlifting. There's definitely still parents out there that think their kids are going to have stunted growth from weightlifting, which is just not true. I mean, you'd have to be extremely negligent to hurt a kid bad enough. And basically, if you use safe technique, it's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I definitely see more and more people incorporating it into strength training, and definitely I helped train a bunch of wrestlers at a high school a few years back, and they all, a couple of them made All-American. They won the state championships, all that stuff. So I think kids do it. Maybe they don't publicize it as much, but it's definitely more popular. And I definitely see more kids lifting at the youth and junior level than we did in the past.
Great. And now, as far as the popularity now of CrossFit, what are you seeing as far? First of all, what is your opinion on CrossFit?
Well, I mean, there's things to love about it, and there's things that can improve. I mean, you got to be careful because they like to, you'll get a nasty gram from CrossFit headquarters if you say something too harsh. But I'm just kidding. I would say, I think it's great in that it introduced people to weightlifting. It helped popularize it. We have to admit that. But there's this whole debate on whether you could be a great CrossFitter and become a great weightlifter at the same time. I think if you're training just truly for CrossFit, right, it's going to sub-optimize your lifting. Take the lady Tia Claire Toomey. She won the CrossFit Games. But, sure, she competes for Australia at the Olympics, which isn't, Australia's they're okay, whatever. They're not Russia. But she didn't win a medal. So the whole point is if you want to be a really high elite level weightlifter, not just someone who goes to an international competition, but a really high level. If you're training just for CrossFit, you're going to sub-optimize your lifting. But the same thing is true. If you're training just for weightlifting, you're going to sub-optimize your CrossFit. So you take Oksana Slavenko. She won a silver medal at the Olympics. I think she was upgraded to gold with the retest. She didn't test positive. She's from Russia. She didn't. I don't think she qualified for the CrossFit Games, but she had been doing CrossFit and competed at regionals. So yeah, if you really the thing is I think people need to understand they work different systems in the body. Everything. There's no we're using fast twitch muscle fibers for weightlifting. In CrossFit, there are phases where you do that, but there's a huge endurance and mid-range endurance component that you don't have in weightlifting. And then if you're focusing on that as a weightlifter, you're going to sub-optimize your recovery.
Yeah, no question. I feel like you wouldn't have enough time in the day to train optimally for not just the right energy systems and the right physiology, but to get all the reps you need to to be a high-level weightlifter. There's no time to do anything else. There really isn't.
Yeah. I mean, they're just, like you said, they're different energy systems. But I will say, though, the CrossFitters I know who are very successful, they don't do the workout of the day every day. They do, their customized program, and they have more, I would say they have more of a lifting component. I'm speaking from having, kind of spent time with Annie Thorisdottir, who won the CrossFit Games twice. But I think that is a theme. Like, if you want to be a really good CrossFitter and go to the CrossFit Games, don't just do every single workout of the day that comes up. So,
every single one I've met is...
You basically have to do programming, and you could actually apply Soviet system to that programming, except with different exercises.
Yeah, every single successful CrossFitter that I've met that competes at a high level has a sports scientist writing their programs for them. And it's very specific to what they need. So they're not doing what every other resident CrossFit person is doing. They're doing specialized programming.
Exactly. And that again, it goes back to why you need to know how to program, why you need to have, why math is important. Like, this is actually funny. This could be like an ad for why you should stay in school and like math, because everything is math. I mean, yeah, there's other aspects, but I would even say even language has mathematical components to it.
I agree.
So now, Gwen, when it comes to your typical routine, so now you've crossed the threshold of being 30 years old. You want to make sure that your joints and you have flexibility and that you still have great technique. What are some of the exercises that you find helpful that are not weightlifting exercises that are helpful in maintaining your weightlifting technique or your weightlifting edge?
I don't, like, honestly, for my specific individual, I don't think a lot has changed, but if you're talking like auxiliary exercises, it's very individualized. So I had like a really bad elbow injury a few years ago, so I actually look to what baseball players do to get their elbow stronger, right? I can't think of the exact name of the exercise, but definitely strengthening it in multiple ranges of motion. A lot of triceps. I found tricep work is underappreciated. Actually, I like split squats. Not doing them all the time, but I like them to stretch out, the adductors and abductors, because you get really tight around the glutes and hips. And you don't always engage enough adductor when you're lifting, so that's helpful. I've actually found ice skating to be helpful to some extent in horseback riding for the same reason, because it kind of gets that inner thigh stronger. And because sometimes I'm out on the edges of my like pinky toes when I lift versus on the ball of the foot, because I have to point my knees out, so it's like strengthening the opposite thing. But stretching is important. It's tough because you have like only finite time in the day. So spending an extra, 20 minutes stretching, sometimes I I'm not as, I don't follow through on that as much, but it's like incredibly important.
It's interesting because we both worked with your Ivan being one of them, your husband and your coach. I've worked with several high-level weightlifting coaches around the world, and we've both worked with Dr. Herrera and I think Pierre Roy in Montreal, and they both use ancillary lifts like split squats and step-ups at certain points in the programming, just to be able to get some structural balance in there. And I think you're saying the same thing for the upper body as well, doing some ancillary arm work and medial delt work and ab work just to supplement the actual weightlifting.
Oh, yeah, you can never have strong enough abs, and you can never have a strong enough low back. Like, my low back is insanely strong, but it always has to be stronger. And the abs especially, like, if I'm having issues with my squat position, the first thing I do is lower abs.
So you isolate that muscle group and work on that.
Yeah, because it's all that stability from the low abs to the pelvic area. Actually, that's where I think Joe Hayes talks about that a lot too. That's where a lot of the work needs to be done. Upper body, yeah. I mean, for me, I wish I had bigger rear delts, but I don't know if it's like genetic or something.
Hey, Gwen, did you lift weights while you were pregnant?
Oh, I did. I did stop. I stopped like doing snatches and clean and jerks. It just became too uncomfortable.
At what point?
I did do lifting through almost all the pregnancy, but the last month very minimal. Only because it was just uncomfortable position. So I think it certainly helped me because my delivery was extremely easy. It wasn't hard to push the child out, my daughter out. And I think a lot of women can benefit from that, especially the strong abs is incredibly important. And then, I had really bad back pain after I had my daughter, and I was almost worried that I wouldn't lift again. And actually, by squatting, it actually fixed all my back pain.
Interesting. Yeah, squat is a therapeutic exercise. Yeah, now, I have a 9-month-old, and everything that we read for my wife was still either aerobically based or yoga, some type of movement therapy, which is okay, but I told her the biggest component that I thought was strength. I thought, her ability to contract whatever she wanted to contract versus contracting everything in the pelvis was critical for her. So, yeah, it was, and the weight training that she did really helped her a lot. It was, we had a 4.5-hour labor, which isn't bad for the first child.
No, not at all. I mean, it's definitely, I don't see how strength couldn't help you, right? And it just seems a lot of women are so afraid to get stronger, and especially with all these rise in the number of C-sections, why, if you could just have stronger abs, why risk having your body cut open?
Oh, absolutely. So. Yeah, I think the starting point is just move backwards. That's what it is, just the same thing. Sitting in front of a computer for 8 to 12 hours and not moving around is certainly going to exacerbate anything difficult like giving birth. But how did you mentioned that you had the baby, were doing your master's program at MIT and training at the same time?
I was in undergrad at the time. It was horrible because I didn't sleep one day a week. There's a period of time in my life where I didn't sleep for 1 day a week for 10 years.
Really?
So, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So now that I sleep almost every day in the week, I'm like, this is great. This is fantastic.
How was training during that time period? What did that do to your...
It's funny. So I didn't realize that I was basically adrenally drained. I was basically tired all the time. So I thought I had infinite energy when really I was just tired all the time. So I started seeing Dr. Rothfeld in Waltham, Massachusetts, and he tested my adrenal function and full hormone panel, and I found out that I was basically adrenally flat. So I started supplementing with adaptogens, and now I'm really sensitive to when I lose sleep. So if someone says, oh, it's because you're older, I'll say bullshit. It's because I'm so in tune with my body now that if I lose an hour of sleep, I feel it and I actually notice it.
Oh, I agree with you. People are like, well, yeah, because you get older. I'm like, no, it's because that's normal to you. 5 hours sleep is normal to you. You don't know what it feels like to sleep 8 hours and feel good and train hard.
Oh, yeah. My ideal is if I could sleep 8 hours and then take a half-hour nap every day. That would be ideal. It's probably more sleep 7.5 hours and get a 15-minute nap, some days. But, sleep's underappreciated. But I would say the supplementation is incredibly important. Adaptogens like reishi, cordyceps, holy basil, ginseng.
So herbal adaptogens, yeah. Any shout outs you want to give to people that you supplement companies that you like that?
Oh, there's so many. I like Life Extension, and then what's the other one? Douglas Laboratories.
Yes.
Let me ask you a question. Do you do better with individual adaptogens, or do you do better with products that will incorporate 4 or 5 or 6 different adaptogens in one?
That's a great question because I go back and forth on it. I had this one product I was prescribed called Adaptocrine, and I do really well on it, but then I get kind of too used to it. Yeah. So I like doing maca, cordyceps, ginseng. I actually prefer to buy things separately.
I agree. I like to rotate adaptogens too.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I believe it's just much more effective. I don't have any science behind that other than I have used that product that you just mentioned, Adaptocrine. I've used it quite a bit. It's a very good product. But again, it's 4 to 6 different adaptogens in one product. And I found that when I moved to doing 2 or 3 taken separately and then rotating them throughout the year, I found my sleep to be much better. I found, just to have that better kind of a cortisol response.
Yeah, do you feel like you just get too used to it after some point?
Yeah, I do believe we habituate, like we get used to certain things. I think you could probably benefit from rotating a lot of different types of supplements. So let's kind of dive into that. So how important is nutrition to you, and what type of analysis do you do to better understand your biochemical state?
So I think everyone should get blood work. Everyone. You should get, and the thing is, if you go to a general practitioner, most of them are just going to say like a lipid panel and a very simple metabolic panel. I don't think it's enough. I think you should check all your hormones. What else?
Especially if you're training.
I'm sorry, what?
Especially if you're training, there's so many ways your hormones can take a nosedive if you wind up overtraining or not recovering, etc.
So definitely all your hormones. I look at zinc and magnesium. Magnesium is a mineral that's really overlooked at times. And then you can even get like an amino acid panel, so you can see like which amino acids you're low on. Because like asparagine, ornithine, what else? Arginine. Those really play into your growth hormone. And a lot of people don't realize like how these systems are related. Like your growth hormone, you can influence by what amino acids you take. So that's something that's really simple to do, and it's very effective. And the thing is, if you're taking supplements, you don't really know if they're working unless you do blood work. So, I mean, sometimes I have like 15 vials of blood drawn, which is kind of insane. But I'd rather do that than have crappy health. I mean,
how many times a year do you have your blood drawn?
I actually have been. I should do it like once a quarter, but sometimes I'm like twice a year, once a year, just because like it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah, I mean, I typically recommend people do it once a quarter for the first couple of years, and then we try to drop down to twice a year. Again, it depends on what your goals are. It depends on what you're trying to do. There are people who are trying to manage illness, and there are people who are trying to manage performance. They're different, different things. So when it comes, so you wake up in the morning, you start your day. I assume there's some kind of breakfast. There's a handful of supplements that you're going to take. Give us a day in the life of Gwen.
Yeah, so I wake up. Hopefully, I got close to 8 hours. Realistically, it's probably more like 7.5. Oh, I have a sleep monitor that's actually helped me be more consistent with sleep.
Which one do you use?
You know what? Someone bought me a Fossil sleep monitor. I like it, but it doesn't have heart rate. But it's just, honestly, the value of tracking my sleep actually is pretty. I didn't think it would help me this much, but it actually does.
We just we get no money for it, but we just ordered the Oura rings. It's capital Oura, and it's and I looked into a bunch of them, and this is the one that I felt like had the best data behind it and research behind it. And it's just a ring, so it's cool. So you don't have to wear like some kind of stupid watch or.
And you're not getting bombarded.
A ring?
It's a ring.
Cool.
And it tracks so much, and it doesn't bombard you with all kinds of Wi-Fi and EMF and all of that. So
I'll send you the link, and we'll put the link for our guests.
Matter of fact, I actually lost my wedding band swimming in a lake in Austin. And I told my wife I'm going to replace my wedding band with the Oura ring, so that's going to become my new wedding band.
Oh my god, I should have been pissed at you, but hey, that's nice.
It also tracks how happy you are at home.
Really? You change colors like a mood ring? Oh, it's bright pink. You're super in love.
But you're right. I can't remember where I heard this, and I do like to give credit. I don't want to take credit for coming up with this, but if sleep were, let's put it this way, if we go back through human history, right? If we go back to our hunter-gatherer ancestors, if you spend a third of your day sleeping, you're vulnerable to predators. You're vulnerable to anything that would harm you. And if evolution would have corrected for sleep. In other words, if there was a way in which you didn't need sleep, your survivability would increase, and that would have. But evolution never got rid of sleep. We still need a third. 33% of the day, of the 24-hour day, we have to sleep, which means it's pretty damn important.
Yeah, it's really
well. At least we're not cats who sleep like almost all day, right?
right. Exactly. It's the number one sleep expert on performance is a guy by the name of Dr. James Moss, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but eventually we'll get him on the podcast to talk about. He's done a bunch of studies with Cornell on sleep and performance, and a while back, I forget what Olympics it was, he was asked to consult with a local figure skater from Long Island who wasn't even ranked in the top 10, and she ended up winning the gold medal in figure skating. And we asked him, we're like, what'd you do different? He's like, well, we monitored her sleep, and we took out morning 5 a.m. practice like right away, and she started hitting jumps and moves that she had never hit before. And in my opinion, it was just because her central nervous system never recovered with that little sleep. So
it's just spent.
Yeah. So, and what other recovery methods, Gwen, do you use that are unique now? Because, for our listeners, like, this is the big trend now with all the biohacking, which I really don't like that word, but
I hate that word because it's so just not the correct one. Right?
It really isn't. It's really about just performance curiosity or performance, improvement. And so, what other recovery methods do you use, or that you find that really make a difference and you can see actually in your performance?
Okay, so aside from supplementation, the biggest one is ice therapy. Okay. So the Cuban weightlifters, they used to take chunks of ice and they would ice their legs in a certain pattern between workouts.
In a pattern?
Again, it was like, it's hot in Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
But what it does, it stimulates cortisol and norepinephrine production, which is both affects your adrenal performance, which also would affect your sympathetic nervous system and reflex responses.
Mm-hmm.
And then Navy SEALs, this is crazy. So I was doing a lot of research on it. Like, I studied up on, like, animals who live in cold locations can't survive without adrenal glands because they have to be able to adapt to the cold. They need adrenal production.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, there's this guy, Wim Hof, the Iceman.
Mm-hmm.
He has this incredible immune response, and he doesn't get sick, and they do all these tests on him, and they measure his cortisol and norepinephrine, and he has more brown body fat, which stores more mitochondria and gives more energy. And he climbed Mount Everest barefoot in just a pair of shorts. You know what I mean? So he's really insensitive to cold. But this was cool. I was talking to a military person the other day, and we were talking about Navy SEAL training, the BUDS thing, when they first get into the Navy SEALs.
Right.
And one of the reasons they figured out that those guys or those people could get through the training was that they're always in the cold Pacific. Like, they're in the water a lot. Or even as Navy SEALs, they're frogmen or whatever. They're in the water a lot, and it's really cold.
Mm-hmm.
So the Pacific Ocean is a lot colder than the Atlantic in Florida or whatever.
Right.
So someone did a study on it. I need to find the study. That they correlate the recovery with the intense training followed by training that was in the cold water.
That's interesting. I didn't read about that with the Navy SEALs, but looked into quite a bit of cold shock therapy, which it stimulates cold shock proteins, and there's a big difference between cold plunging, which is what you're talking about, and cryotherapy, which is very trendy and popular now. In terms of hormonal responses. But yeah, there's a lot of research coming out of Finland and Norway, apparently, that they've done on both cold recovery training and hot as well.
Yeah, what's your opinion on cryotherapy versus, cold shock?
Cold plunges. The research is in cold plunging. That has a lot more behind it than the cryotherapy chambers, the kind of gas. And so, kind of like going into a 57-degree, cold plunge, is really where the research is. And one of the things I like to always explain to my patients is that genetically, all of us are no different than our hunter-gatherer ancestors, and therefore, if we ask what environment did they live in, and it's pretty safe to say, regardless of where you live on the planet, it was a pretty harsh environment for most people in those times. Which means in very harsh environments, you had one of two situations. You're either going to be extremely healthy and fit, or you're going to die. There's really no place to be. There's no room in if you're in Alaska 10,000 years ago, or if you're in New Hampshire 10,000 years ago.
There's no embassy suites.
Yeah, if you're kind of insulin resistant, overweight, and lazy,
can't run from a predator.
you're not going to live. So you'll die, and then so the people who are left are that extremely healthy and fit. And with that being said, extreme environments actually are epigenetic triggers for your DNA to stimulate the production of many proteins that have longevity benefits, anti-cancer benefits, and of course performance benefits. Cold is one of them.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with an athlete a couple of months ago that we'll have on the podcast. I'll leave his name out, but he was doing a ton of research. Just one of these guys that is extremely intelligent and wants to find out how he can get a 5% edge on anybody, a 1%, a 0.5%.
Sorry.
That's okay, no worries. And so in talking to him, he had looked into all this research on dry saunas and found research whereby building up to being able to do a dry sauna above 185 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes twice a day had like an 8-fold increase on growth hormone and like a 5 to 6-fold increase on testosterone. And so he was doing it and actually measuring his blood, and sure enough, the data that he got back from his own blood work almost matched exactly what the research said. So this is going to be a big deal. Yeah.
But you're kidding me. So you're saying, okay, the other question is, why is dry sauna always better than wet sauna?
Well, one thing is that the temperature is different. And the other thing is, I think that it's from a health standpoint, the wet heat is probably not the best environment you want to be in unless it's like extremely sanitized. So that's one thing. And you know what? I'm butchering this, and there's probably a better scientific reason.
I just think the one is going to there's going to be a preference in your body to the production of heat shock proteins on the dry sauna rather than the wet sauna.
So this is fantastic, because in weightlifting, the researchers from Soviet, Bulgaria, all that junk, they always say dry sauna. Anywhere I've gone, they've always said dry sauna. Didn't show me data why, but they're like dry sauna and at least once a week sauna. Mm-hmm. The saunas I've been in Eastern Europe, I don't think we're quite at 185, but that's maybe something I should try. But I try to sauna at least once a week.
That's smart. Yeah. There is a study that came out of Finland on men over 40, and the study was done on a big control group. And they said that 3 20-minute saunas over 170 Fahrenheit had a 40 to 50% decrease in all-cause mortality. That means like heart disease, cancer, etc., etc. That was 3 20-minute sessions, and it was a very big control group.
Yeah, it kind of it lends to that idea that extreme environments are going to trigger survival mechanisms in the body, epigenetic effects, which are going to be protective. So heat, cold, lifting weights. These are all ways of creating an extreme environment for yourself. So Gwen, let's now turn the conversation a little bit towards business. You're a bit of an entrepreneur. You don't necessarily fit. Your career doesn't fit neatly into any other box. So you have your own training facility. You have your own line of sports apparel, I believe.
Shoes.
No, not exactly. I do have. I mean, currently, I do have a training facility where I do consulting, and obviously, the books that I'm going to keep writing books. I co-authored the first 2 with Ivan Rojas. I'm probably going to write some additional books. But yeah, so definitely it's more of like, at this point in my life, consulting athletes, and it doesn't have to be just weightlifters, athletes from any sport, like baseball, football, wrestling, gymnastics, whatever, because everyone can benefit from the Olympic lifts.
That's an important point, Gwen, because we'll have a lot of listeners who either compete in various sports or have children or family members that are competing, like Dr. G himself. And that's something that the Soviets and the Cubans, they did a ton of research into. If you had to pick one type of training tool that you could use for an athlete, it would be to teach them how to weightlift. And they did a ton of research on that, and you probably in writing the books can tell you how the Soviets applied that to other sports outside of weightlifting.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, because it goes back to the reflex response, and then engaging the entire body. So I've seen it even here in America. Like, some sports, they like doing more power cleans. Like, you might not need to snatch for every sport. I would say maybe if you're a thrower or do throwing exercises, I might snatch. But like clean and jerks, or even just power cleans and power jerks, that might just be enough for some athletes. I mean, in addition to squatting and that type of stuff.
Do you have any?
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Do you have any experience or data to say that people who engage in Olympic lifts or this type of weightlifting, that their rates of injury are less than if they didn't?
There is. So there was an old study that it was like something like 0.01 per 100,000. The IWF, the International Weightlifting Federation, just published another article. Let me see if I could bring it up. I think it was like, it was like basically the safest sport in the Olympics, which is one of the reasons why I've always pushed that people who use weightlifting but might not compete in weightlifting, such as in fitness people or even CrossFit and things like that, is weightlifting should be extremely safe, and that we should take basic steps to ensure that people do the sport in a safe manner, because there's no reason for anybody to get hurt. Hold on a second. I think I'm trying to see if I could find the link, but it's definitely.
I remember the study though, because Charles Poliquin, a colleague and friend, had mentioned that to me, and that was way more than 20 years ago. That he mentioned the study about weightlifting being the sport that has the least amount of injuries per participant in the Olympics.
It still does. I'm serious. It's like not even 1% rate. Yeah. It's incredibly tiny. So
I have a theory on that, Gwen. I want to know what your thoughts are. Number one is, my theory is that when you teach someone the Olympic lifts, whether they be the snatch or the clean and jerk, it's an incredible diagnostic tool. So you can see structural imbalances, you can see mobility imbalances, you can see strength deficits, you can see neurological imbalances in posture, whereas in other forms of training you can't, and you kind of undress that right away when you teach someone. You're like, oh no, wait a minute, dude, you have mobility issues, or Linda, your upper back strength or your posterior strength is too weak. We have to work on that. So I think it's such a great diagnostic tool that you undress a lot of potential issues and can address them, whereas you can get stronger in other forms of training and continue to increase what I call that gradient of disparity that is kind of a clear path to injury.
Right. And that's so true, because right away, you get someone who can't squat all the way. Most of the time, it's because their abs are weak. Like, they can't maintain that erect back position, especially when they hit full depth. I found that I found, like, out of, I don't know, thousands of people, I had one guy who he couldn't squat because his bones hit each other. One person over, thousands of people that literally could not squat because of the shape of his bones. And there are people like that. But most people who can't squat, it's because weak abs. I mean, there's other things going on, and certainly having a shoe with a heel helps incredibly. Like, having a pair of weightlifting shoes, preferably wood heel, that's like the best thing to have. But everyone should be able to squat, even just doing a decent squat. Most people aren't that 0.001% that literally cannot squat, right? So so in lifting, you're absolutely right. I mean, you could see right away where people are weak. I mean, some people say you could just tell by you just get someone a bar, maybe even just a stick, like a broomstick, and you'll see right away as they go through the motions. So yeah,
and then part 2 of the theory is that in weightlifting, you're teaching the body how to decelerate at a high speed, and I find that in other sports, that's for me the largest cause of injuries. So number 1, structural imbalance. Number 2, not being able to decelerate at a high speed. So I find, like, weightlifting for my athletes is paramount at some point in their training program.
Oh, that's really fascinating, because, like, when you lift, you shouldn't be, like, diving with the bar. The bar shouldn't be crashing down on you. And you'll see lifters that do that, and you'll see them, missing weights frequently. It's really, you have to be able to maintain that back position and your pelvic position and absorb the shock. So a really perfect lift, you should bounce out on the bottom. It doesn't have to be a perfect bounce every time, but that's kind of a good rule of thumb. Like, you should not be losing your back or losing the position of your knees pointing out as you catch the bar.
We're going to link to maybe some videos of a really good lifts and what they look like. And just for our audience, go to the Thrivalistmanifesto.com website so you can, first of all, subscribe to our podcast, download our podcast, share our podcast with everyone.
Get links to her books.
Get links to Gwen's books. We're going to have her website and her information and her videos for you to take a look at. So, Gwen, what's next for you? Where do you see your career going moving forward? Where's Gwen 5 years from now?
Oh my God! Wow. I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely gonna keep lifting because I just keep getting better at it. I want to like lift even heavier weights, like I was doing, before I blew my elbow out. So that's one thing. I want to write more books because there's just so much information that people need to have. Like, I guess I'm gonna like a weightlifting evangelist, maybe.
I like that.
Preach the gospel of good weightlifting. I want to help more people with their lifting who could really benefit from this. Like, being a resource for people coming from other sports, both professional and amateur level. Because there's a lot of these problems can be fixed quickly, and there's sustainable solutions to help people improve. And if you could have that extra edge, why wouldn't you use it?
I agree, and I think in the world of professional sports, there's a lot of athletes that just think they know what they're doing, and they're doing things in a very old-fashioned way. And you see a lot of athletes just getting the same injuries over and over. And I'm thinking of a pitcher here in New York that is a big, giant, barrel-chested guy, and he kind of has the body of somebody who exercises the way we did in 1988, when you were just kind of going on a bench press and doing things that are very neurologically not taxing. And it just seems like if you were to do an Olympic-type lift, not only could you get stronger, but you would coordinate in a 360-degree, three-dimensional way how you respond to the world around you, which is really, what prevents injury.
That's a mouthful. Yeah, no question.
I kind of almost want to ban bench pressing from my place which, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a good exercise for certain things, but some people just cling to it as the only way to stay fit, which is kind of ridiculous. Like, why would you only bench press, or why would you put that as the hallmark of fitness and strength? I don't know. But yeah, no, I think there's a lot of professional athletes that I could help, and, you know, even amateur ones, so...
Yeah, I've always said, I mean, for me, if you gave me one exercise I could do or teach, it would be a snatch. And, you know, if I was an athlete, if that's all I could do, then, and I had a limited amount of time and a limited amount of equipment, that's what I would turn to, because to me, it's removing common sense from the equation. If I'm any kind of athlete, I want to be able to accept ground force and to communicate force through either the end of a racket or my hand or a punch or a football or just running. And there's no better exercise or no better training tool to use than an Olympic lift that does that teaches your brain how to do that. To me, I don't see it any other way.
Yeah, that's so true, because, like, there's times where I'm really pressed to train, like, especially when I have to travel. I spend a lot of time in Europe, and, like, just snatching is, like, incredible. Even if I only have 10 minutes to do it, it's better than nothing. Mm-hmm. And, like, for me, I feel like I can't go more than, like, 3 days without lifting, because it's like starting over, you know? Even if it's better if I snatch, seriously, if I'm really at a pinch, it's better to snatch with even just the bar than do nothing.
Than do nothing, right? I know, for me, it's like, if you take that many days off, especially Olympic lifting, the warm-up becomes difficult. That, for me, it's like the positions. It's just getting in position. It's like, oh, God, this didn't feel that bad, you know, a week ago or whatever, and now this feels bad. And then after a couple of days, it's like, oh, no, this is good. I'm okay now. I'm all right now. But I agree with you. I had some baseball players that said, I only have 15 minutes to warm up. So they would literally do like a global Eldoa, and then they would do like 5 sets of triples on the snatch with the bar. And that was their warm-up, but full.
Wow.
And they would go out and start doing lower intensity sprints right after that. But that's how much value that one exercise provided in the warm-up for them.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about supplements, but what do and getting your blood checked to determine what it is you should take, and what about food? What are some basic rules you have surrounding food?
Oh, I mean, food's so important. If there's anything you're going to spend money on, spend it on good food. I mean,
Gwen's an Italian from Boston too, from New England area. So this is a tough one.
So it's just like, okay. So the one thing is, you know, I try to avoid things with lots of preservatives, because that can impede your digestion and impede your absorption of minerals. So you're spending all this money on supplements, and then you're not even absorbing them, and then you're still hungry because you're eating preservatives. I mean, I know a lot of people that come over here from Europe and they gain weight. It's like, why am I gaining weight? I'm eating less. It's like, well, you're probably not digesting and processing things as efficiently. And anyway, so I try to eat stuff where I know where it came from. Like, try not to eat too much processed food, or even if I buy something that's like pre-made, make sure that it still looks like the original thing it came from. Like, if you're gonna buy cooked vegetables, they shouldn't be so overcooked that you can't even see like what vegetable it used to be.
I always say if your best friend was a hunter gatherer from 10,000 years ago, if he can't recognize that what you're about to eat is food, then you probably shouldn't be eating it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, every once in a while you're going to buy something for convenience, but I don't eat a lot of bread. I really avoid yeast. I drink a lot of coffee because I like the antioxidants. I use a lot of coconut oil. I try to use mostly grass-fed beef if I can. Sometimes it's hard to find. And then, like, you know, lots of, like, fresh vegetables, like salad greens, kale. You know, every once in a while I might get, like, frozen vegetables, like broccoli or something, but I don't really try to do that. And then, like, I try not to have too much starch, but, like, you know, rice and potatoes are okay. Quinoa, buckwheat's really good. that sort of stuff. I try not to. I definitely don't eat a lot of sugar. I'm experimenting with salt intake because I usually don't use a lot of salt, but I think with the amount of phosphates you burn from lifting, I'm probably not taking enough salt.
I agree with that. I think we've demonized salt, and I'm not talking about iodized table salt. I'm talking about a full complex of minerals and salts, that you would find in, let's say, a sea salt or something like that. And even supplementing, like you said, the phosphates and magnesium, is a good idea. And if you're going to go low on the carbohydrate scale and you're not going to release a lot of insulin, well, then you're more than likely going to get rid of a lot of salt, which means you're going to be more likely dehydrated. So adding salt, I think, is a good idea.
Yeah.
For sure. So let's. I think we're coming to a close here, Gwen. We've been talking for I think over an hour.
About 90 minutes.
Yeah, and I think we can keep going. This is great stuff, and weightlifting is really, again, from the youth all the way up into our seniors. There's so much so much benefit that we can have, and just increasing the awareness. You writing books. I would love to see you write a book for weightlifting and teenage or childhood sports. I'd like to see you write a book on women. I'd like to see you write a book on a lot of different topics to kind of dispel a lot of the myths that are out that surround weightlifting. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for you, and we hope to have you back on the show.
Gwen, where can our audience find you and get more information?
Okay, so a couple ways. I'm on social media, Instagram, Twitter, my blog, gwenweightlifting.blogspot.com, and then my books are on Amazon, Smashwords, I think also Barnes & Noble.
And the titles again, please?
Kindle. Actually, this is really bad. I probably forget the title of my own book, right?
What is the Soviet weightlifting system?
I think I remember it was like this is how hold on. If you look up Sisto Soviet weightlifting system, you'll find it. So it's the Kazakhstan weightlifting system and the Soviet weightlifting system.
Beautiful.
Excellent.
Fundamentals of the Soviet system, the Soviet weightlifting system. That's that book. That one actually goes over how to program, and then the other one is the Kazakhstan weightlifting system, and that has some sample programs in it.
Oh, nice.
The programming is so important. So
beautiful. That's fantastic. Well, Gwen, thanks again for doing the interview. We look forward to having you on again. I look forward to doing some research on weightlifting and concussions with you. The best of success in the career and the best of success in the competition.
You too, guys. I think it's awesome what you're doing, having such a positive podcast where people actually learn things and improve themselves. So,
thanks. Spread the word.
Got it.
All right. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.